Today's daf is daf Vav and Horayos, and the Gemara is talking about. We're trying to understand here. It says that they brought in the second base Hamikdash. They brought a number of kabbanas. They brought actually 12 paras. So Rabbi Yehuda said, name of Shmuel, that this was for the Avodah Zarah that the last generation, but 70 years earlier, brought. And we explained, well, 12 makes sense. According to Reb Shimon, there were 11 Shvatim who sinned, and the Bezin Paskin that it was all right. So therefore, you have 12, 11 plus the Bezin. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it was 12 Shvatim. But according to Rabbi Meir, it says that only the Bezin brings, it's only one carbon. Why would they bring 12? So you want to answer, they sinned, and then they did tshuva, they sinned, they tshuva, they sinned, they did tshuva 12 times. And therefore, you bring the carbon. So now we're up to the Gemara in the middle of the discussion. And you want to ask an interesting question. Right in the middle, about 20 lines from the top of the page. Ask the Gemara. So the Gemara asks, but all those people who sinned 70 years earlier passed away by now. So what do you bring? And we have rule 5 different chatos. That there are 5 different chatos shemesu. That if there's halacha as you've seen, that 5 different cases of a karma chatas that was set aside that you can no longer bring. And it dies. You have to let it die. For example, if the Bailim already brought another carbon, you lost it and brought another carbon, if it's over a year old by the time you bring it up. And one of them is that Shemesu Ba'aleh. If the Bailim died, you can no longer bring the carbon because what are you mechaper? He's dead. The Misa itself that he died was his kapara. So they all died already. Why are you bringing carbon chatas in the Ezra for the people of Tzikiyot? Omar Rapapa says, the famous words, when did we say that what? That if the owners died, you can no longer bring the chatas hanimil b'yachid, only by an individual. Ain tzibur meis. When it comes to a tzibur, they don't die. If it's ain misa b'tzibur, there's no misa by tzibur. So okay. So that explains, even though the ain misa b'tzibur, therefore you can still bring the karma chatas. That once it was set aside, you bring it. So now here's a little bit different. In those 5 cases, you set it aside as chatas, and then the owner died, or the owner was nischaper. Here, you are setting aside 70 years later a karma chatas for people who died already. So Papa takes it a step further. Ain tzibur meis, no, but they still need a kapara, and therefore we can bring it even after the dead because it was a whole tzibur. Big chiddush. So how does he know this chiddush? Is it because it says the pasuk? The pasuk says in Hilum, Tachas avisecha yibanecha. The children step in the shoes of the father. We're going to say it means even for our Vedas, and therefore the children are mechuyev to go ahead and bring kabbanas for the father. So I feel nami. Then even a yachid also. Then why dafke a tzibur? If there's an obligation on the children to atone for the father's sins, then every child should bring a karban chatas for his father. And if we had in Kedusha and other places that if a woman set aside the carbon and then she died, you don't bring it anymore because chatas meisa ba'aleh. Oila might be different because she put the rice in the whole discussion. But a child has to is chayiv. Ella, do you get a puppy? He knows it from? The goat of Rosh Chodesh. So why the Amar Achman and Maisi Matur Salishcha? Where do you get the money for the Truma for the Rosh Chodesh? You got the money from the Truma Salishcha. Now we have the carbon of Rosh Chodesh, the carbon of Yom Tov. We had in Masechet Shavuos is to do with a kapara for tumah. Somebody that forgot that he was tummy, walked the base of Mikdash, knew his tummy, forgot this the base of Mikdash. Right? We had the Seidim of Yom Tov, and we have the. Now when it comes to Yom Tov, 3 times a year they would take the Truma Chadosh. They would take money from this allocation from these boxes we have in Rosh Chodesh. 3 times a year they did that. Always 15 days before Yom Tov. So it's possible that nobody died in those 15 days. So therefore everybody's alive, and the chatos you're bringing now is for everybody. But as Chodesh, you did like 3-4 months in a row based on this old money. Surely people died. No, how did you bring a karma chatas? Chatas shemeisa ba'aleh or some of the Bailim, unless when it comes to a tzibur, ain't tzibur based. Those who left, how can you bring? Regardless, you still bring it up. Pretty much what are you talking about? Midami. When it comes to go to the Chodesh, it's a suffix. Maybe they did die, maybe they didn't die. But over here, 70 years later, surely they died. Sure they died. Ela timer that are proper. And so what do you mean midam Rosh Chodesh? It's a suffix. So what if it's a suffix? You're telling us Rosh Chodesh, maybe people die, maybe didn't, but here Vadai. And if it's a suffix, why is it any better? Suffix Reisel Chumrah. Since it's a suffix, some people died, suffix Reisel Chumrah. So the first answer that everyone gives is Shittas Rambam. That the Rambam holds that something with the Reisel Chumrah is only with the Rabban. Mehat Torah, there's three levels. The Rivosh explains in the truth. There are three levels. There's Vada Yisr, definite Asr. There's Suffix Yisr, and then there is Heter. And that's the logic he says that Shek Shek is Mutter, because there's only three tiers. If you took it out of a Vada, it puts in the realm of a Suffix. Then there's a Suffix in the Suffix. What's the next get? There's nothing else but Heter. So that's why the Rivosh explains the truth that Shek Shek is Mutter. So they say that a suffix, a raisa, the tier number 2 is not asum matayr anymore; it's only asum rabbanon. So therefore, that's what the Gemara is saying here. Barish pedish is only a suffix matayr. You can bring it. That's why you bring it. But Bashenkin over here, it's a vaday. They all die. So the question remains, and everyone asks, well, the Rashba holds that suffix matayr is matayr l'chumra. So how did they bring it? So and a lot of them remain sorchid, but others want to say that when we learn Gemara Gittin that if a person, sends a get, we say b'cheskes chai. That we assume he's still alive 2 months later by the time the get reaches there, because every person has a chazaka that they're alive. And the same with kabbanis. Ashalech karban kabbanis. Somebody said it's karban base mikdash. We assume he's still alive. So, as an individual, even though a lot of people gave them money, but as an we look at each person individually. We don't look at the community. And individuals, everyone has a chazaka. And the chazaka is the chai. But we had a concept where a person is very old and sick and everything else. But here it's like a vadai when it comes to tzikio. It's not a suffix. It's 70 years later. Surely they're all dead. Yemeshin is saying to Behem Shiv Mishana. At the time of the Papa, we learn from here. See, it says Kaplam Chisol to Hashem. When it comes to the roof, it says forgive Eden, Rui, Kapora, Zusha, the Kappa. It said Asher Padis Hashem. When did Hashem take us out? Mitzrayim. And this Egla roof in Eretz Yisrael. We should also atone for those who left Mitzrayim as well. That you redeem. So we see what? That you can redeem that you bring a carbon even though they're all mace. So that's how you know that a tzibur, chatza tzibur, it does not die and you can still bring the carbon. By the way, this is the mucker for Yisker. The whole idea of Yisker that we say that it's a kapara also for the people who passed away already. The Ramah and Shulchan Aruch brings, which we don't do, Ramah Shulchan Aruch brings in Hilchos Shabbos, that every single Shabbos you should say Yisker. In the Reish Pei Dalet, he said that every single Shabbos you say Yisker. No. And then after that he say Avarachim as well. He said you do Haskar Neshamas every Haskar Neshamas. Rachim was Moshe and everything else. He said you do Haskar Neshamas. Then you talk about Tamid Chachamim. Then you do your Kippur and you thank all the Oiskim B'Tzorchet Tzibur. And then Avarachim he says you say as well. It's a separate thing. And then he says, which is interesting. He says you don't say Avarachim B'Mei Hasira. And how come our nusach is Sivan we don't say, but here we do say.
Sivan is because of the exact stuff.
In Shulchan Aruch it says you don't say B'Mei Hasira because it's today's the morning, and if you don't say Avarachimim, and we do say in here, we don't say in Sivan. So unless we have a whole different reason, what Ramos talking about. Anyway, it's a separate discussion.
Can I interrupt? Sorry, just this moment. Can we please be learning? Just reminded me learning for Leah Bat Amalia. That's my mother-in-law who's very ill.
Okay, let's chus Leah Bas
Amalia.
Amalia. Okay, we'll continue learning of course. Leah's Neshama.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, she's sick. Sorry.
No, not Neshama. No, she's unwell for Refuah Shlema.
Refuah Shlema.
Yeah,
she had Refuah Shlema. Apologies.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're wrong. Thank you.
All right. Again, how can you compare? Everyone who's remember we found a corpse lying somewhere between two cities. We don't know who it is. We go to the closest city. We make this carbon roof. We say all these things. Everyone in the city is alive. Is because the living have a kapara, so too the mason of a kapara. But over here, who's alive? Who alive from Tzikio? Yes, they are. The Chilul says, but Rabbi Ma'Koinim Balavim Roshi Abbas. It says there by Ezra that when they had the second base meeting started, there's a whole bunch of people there crying because they remembered the first base Hamikdash. It says in the pasuk, so Rabbi Ma'Koinim Balavim, many of the Koinim Balavim, Roshi Abbas, the leaders that saw, it says in the pasuk, that saw the first base Hamikdash, and when they built this base Hamikdash in front of them, they began crying. and not only crying, but Kurl Godel. So we see that there were people still alive. They must have lived a very long life. Talking about the Dilma Mu'atin Haba, talking about but maybe that they was a minority. The late Abim Haba. So the Chayda and Machayda Shainim, we're talking about the Gabi, those who were alive at the time of Shkiyo, is only a few left alive now. We're talking about the Gabi, the people alive right now, there's only a few left, only a few out of the 40,000 there were people who remember the first base of English. Can be, because like see if it says in the Pasuk, and their crying was so loud that you couldn't hear the young ones who were dancing and rejoicing the baby build because the old people were crying. I mean, they outnumbered, the older people outnumbered the younger people. Well, usually old people, okay. But for distance. So it must be there were enough people there, and there's no raya from there. But they were, what kind of karbachatas here? The people in the Deutsche Yo deliberately went ahead and did avodah zara. So what's the karbachatas in the first place? The whole thing was a hayrasha, to bring a chatas for those people. That makes sense. Otherwise, other kabbanas. It says in that very passage where they brought those kabbanas. It says Eilim Tisha B'Shisha. They brought 96 rams. They brought 77 sheep. Connected me. What's that all about? The oldest came from the Navi. He said. The first we were talking, I didn't see any answer, but another cannot be mechadish new things. Where do you find that amazing to bring karbachatas? Where did it come from? What have I learned? Meis echad min hatzibur. This is a cryptic brisa. Meis echad tzibur. If one member of the community died, chayavin, they're still chayiv. Now who's chayiv? The tzibur. Remember we had a machlekes. Who brings the carbon? The bezin or the shevet? So meis echad. If one of the members of the community of the Eden died, chayavin, they're still chayiv. And echad mit bezin. If one member of the bezin died, then pturi. Now what's going on? Mantan. Who is saying this? And therefore it makes sense. That's two different dinim. If one of the members of the tzibur died, that means that remember who's bringing the carbon to bezin? Who cares? Chayavin, the crime called the bezin's alive. If one of the people of the bezin died, then pturin. Then they're put. Why the potter? It's a chatas that one of the members. It's not a chat. The bezin is not called a chatas atzibur. It's a limited number of people. It's more like a chatas of partnership. And by a chatas of partnership, if one of the partners die, you can no longer bring the carbon. Chatas shemeisu baleh. Remember, every shutav has an ownership in here. That's substantial. Therefore, potter they are potter. Like Rashi explains in Sukkah, the Chovzayin did by the Sukkah, like every Yid will have a value of a Shava Pruta. The Minister Chinuch points out over there. You have to have, everyone has a chelik, a chash of a chelik. Masker Rabbi Yeshua has a question, the Nukman of Shimon, I don't like learning Rabbi. You know why? What's the Chiddush? You tell me if a Yid died, the Bezin still brings it. Why shouldn't they? They're the ones who are liable. They're the ones who gave the wrong stock. They're the ones who bring the carbon. So my nafkamina, there was 100,000 Yidden and one Yidden died. So Melabos, you need to tell me the Raisa. I don't like it. I'd rather say it's Reb Shimon, and it's not two dinim, it's one din. Because Reb Shimon holds. Remember, by unit carbon, they both bring the bezdin and the tzibur. So the chiddush is that even though it may be the tzibur that you would think if one of them don't bring, the other one shouldn't bring as well. Kamash only do. That's what he's saying it. Dama bezdin ima tzibur meisech and tzibur chayav. If one of the people in tzibur died, the chayiv why the ain't tzibur meisech. Makes Echem Bezin Peturim. One of the Potter. Kedamrin, the Chatter should finish. Because you would have thought that since the Tzibur still brings, the Bezin should bring. Says no. Even though they're both bringing in tandem, but the Bezin is a Chatter should finish. Amle Bayabai says. So you come up with a chiddush now. You Rabbi Yosef come up with a chiddush now that, like you said before, that a Chatter should finish. If one of them die, you're Potter. And therefore you want to say that a Bezin is Potter. Amle Bayabai Shamin Reb Shimon, and you want to learn this shot in Reb Shimon. Says the Abaye, I got a problem with it. We know the fate of Shimon holds Chatas Shufin ain't a Mesa. Reb Shimon actually holds that if a Chatas Shufin, one of them die, it's just like a Tzibur. Shufin is just like a Tzibur. I'll prove it to you. The Tanya we learned, part of Soya and Kippurim, there was a part and the Soya, the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur that the Kohanim brought for themselves, Aaron brought for the Kohanim. Sha'abdu got lost. So what they did was they had for the Shachareim, Acherim Takteim. They brought another carbon in its place. Now, one of the 5 dinim of Chatas that you may so that you let it die is if it lost it, the Bailim brought another carbon, and then they found it. What do you do with this Chatas that you found? You don't bring it again. You let it die. is Yamusa Kul and Yabuda. Yabuda says, well, that if they that what they all the animal dies. The animals that you set aside, the par and the sawyer, they die. You cannot bring another cut. However, no, they don't die. Why not? Because a chatas hat tzibur ain't a mesa. Yiru lefish ain't chatzir mesa. And we're talking about shutfin, not kahol, because only the kohenim. It's only limited to an exclusive number of people. That's chatas a shutfin. And we see here that Shimon says, you go ahead, you still, you don't kill it. You only musu. So you wait till he has a mum, and then with the mum you sell it, and with the money you bring a carbon over. Only Rabbi Yosef, he says to him, what are you comparing? Koinim ka'amrit, very interesting discussion now. Shiny koinim we could call. Koinim are also considered a call, a tzibur. I'm talking about Bezin, an exclusive elite group of people, 70 people. This is all the koinim. Koinim are a call on their own. It says on the koinim and the kol am a kol. We see that what they're equal to everybody else. They're also a call. You're telling me Shabbai says to you, Rabbi Yosef say that what that koinim are called a kol. Elameata nicer par behuda. So the Yehuda should both say that every shape bring their own carbon. So koinim on their own should bring their own carbon. The chitem hachinam, you say maybe so. Then taflu shvatim no longer 12, it's 13. You have now Shevi Levi, you have also koinim 13. No question. Levi is not called a kol, and Levi is not a kol. And the Chesiv says, I'll give you Ephraim. He says over here that I will give you another. More shvatim, and what will happen? I will give you a chegeg to throw. So this is how it works. Anybody gets a chegeg to throw is called kol. And it was not called kol. So therefore, the entire Shevet Levi, not just kohen, the entire Shevet Levi are not a kol because they have no chegeg in there to throw. So what are they? They're shutfin. They're shutfin. And if they're shutfin, and we see that Shimon holds that you still go ahead and you continue bringing it by kohenim, you bring it. So the same thing by Bezin. If one member of the Bezin calls up Shimon, you still bring it. Not like Rabbi Yosef. When you can't say Chasulu you b'shvatim. Where's your 12 shvatim? But Rabbi Ephraim and Ashken the 12 shvatim is you count Ephraim and Ashken like 2. Don't count them like 1 Yosef. Count them like 2. So Levi is not counted in this whole din of Hoyle Bezin, but you have Ephraim and Ashken. Omar Rav is a Rav of Aksiv. It says no. That anybody else is born after Ephraim and Menashe, they will be getting their chelik together with Ephraim and Menashe. So we see from here, when is Ephraim and Menashe considered shvatim? Only as far as Nachal said to throw. But as far as counting shvatim, there's only 12 shvatim, and Ephraim and Menashe are 1, not 2. So therefore, your Levi must be in it. Said no, but Chalukim at Golem came to the flags. Also, Ephraim and Menashe had different color flags. So we see that they count like 2. So I said, you're right. Kenachavos and Kachaniyosim. Kedei lechal covered the golem. Want to give coverage to the flags. Well, Chaluk in the seam when it came to seam also. Menashe and Ephraim brought 2 different kabbalas by the Chaluk Zabais. How will Achlu come in the seam? That's again. There are exceptions when they count. Those not in every regard are they count like 2 shvatim. Only regarding where we see befedish in the Torah. The Tanya we learned. How do you know you give a cover to the seam? Shloima says I made Shloisha made 7 days. Shloima made 7 days. Chaluk Zabais. Umaro Moshe Lasa Shnei Moshe Mechanik. Why had 12 days in Pashat Nosai? Kedei lachlu cover the seam. Every Nosai should have his day. So the Gemara says my havila. So what happened to Poyel? Is the kohen considered kol, not considered kol, and the bezin, how's it work? Is Rabbi Yosef right that if Shimon holds that a bezin is considered a shutr, and therefore they get cancelled out or not? So what's the bottom line? What is it? And this is what Abaye said, that Chatas HaShutrin, according to Reb Shimon, ain't a mesa, and therefore that's why we don't learn the B'rais like Reb Shimon has been made. Who's right? Abaye or Rabbi Yosef? First, Shimon says, that 5 cases of chatois that mesa, you let it die. Lad chatas, if the korban chatas you set aside had a baby, now what do you do with that baby? You don't bring up as a chatas, but it's kaddish, so therefore you let it die. Tumuras chatas, if you swap the chatas another, so therefore what do you do? So for the second carbon, you let it die. The chatas mesa ba'aleh, the owner died. What do? You don't bring it. You don't bring it up. The chatas is chapra ba'aleh, and the chatas that the owner was forgiven, and the chatas she'avrish nasa, and the chatas that the year is over a year old. You don't bring it up either. The Gemara says when it comes to a tzibur, the first 3 is not shaykh. You can't have a vlad chat tzibur because it's not a female. By a tzibur, you bring a male. So the case of Velad Chatas is not Shayach by Tzibur. The next thing is ain't Tzibur for the cave. You can't say Tzimur Chatas Tzibur, she ain't Tzimur Tzibur. From the passage we see that the no Tzimur by Tzibur. It says everything Lashon Yochid is, so we know that a community cannot be Meimer, and not even Shutman can't be do Tzimur. We just established before that Tzibur doesn't die. But what is Shaykh? The animal got lost and they brought another animal, then they found this animal. Those are Shaykh by Tzibur that is over a year old. So we don't know what happens by Tzibur. By these two cases, which are Shaykh by Tzibur, what happens? Yachol Yamusu, maybe these two cases we should say, okay, these because these two are Shaykh by Tzibur, let it die. I'm going to be learned out. I'm a Feidish. Let's learn out from those three that we know cannot not by Tzibur, and therefore we don't let the animal die. So the same thing that the other two as well. Just like those three, it's only Shaykh by Yochid, by Tzibur, it's not Shaykh. So even the other two cases for Shaykh should follow and train with the other three, and therefore by Tzibur, the whole concept is not Shaykh. It's only by Yochid and not by Tzibur. And the same thing by Shutfin. By Shutfin also, since a Shutfin cannot make a Tamura, so since they're not all Shaykh, so therefore by Shutfin also there's no such thing as Mesa Bala, and that's why Abai is right and not Rabbi Yosef. What does it mean? Okay, which not Shaykh, not Shaykh. It's just because the three things are not Shaykh by Tzibur, but two of them are Shaykh. So why don't you apply at least these two dinim by Tzibur? What's this thing? Yimon Stayman I'm a Feidish. So the Gemara, Rab Shimon b'chad mokum gaber. Interesting. Rab Shimon says that these 5 halachas are given to us in one group. Either they're all Shaykh, it wasn't 5 separate laws, and then we'll say, well, those are not Shaykh and not Shaykh. And we had a machlek, by the way, if you remember, if you're down Efsher, Mashiach. But at least, if it's 5 separate laws, you can have a discussion. What about the ones that are Shaykh? But over here, the 5 laws are given together in one go. It's a package deal, exactly. Or yeah or no, all or none. And therefore, just like by Tzibur's none, by Shutfin, even though it's only less, it's only one thing that's Shaykh, let's say, but it doesn't matter. Now continue. The Torah also says that we have a kohen Mashiach, we have a nasi, we have an average person who doesn't have Veda, and then we had Hoyle Bezin, where everyone followed the Bezin by mistake. And then we have a kohen Mashiach, a kohen that's anointed. And the chiddush of a kohen Mashiach is he never brings a karmachatas if he didn't have Veda b'shogeg, because it says ma'am ha'aretz, as I said, only ma'am ha'aretz. And even Lamar is a complementary term, but it's not applying to a Kohen Mashiach. By him, the only time that a Kohen, anointed Kohen Gadol, is if he's qualified to be a Bezin. The only time that he brings a Karma Chatas is if he paskin to himself that it's all right what I'm doing. In other words, he made that mistake. He's the Bezin, he is both, because he represents authority and he represents the commoner. And both of them he encompasses both. So if he paskin that something is mutter, and then he went ahead and followed his own psak, that's when you really go chatas. No. Yeah. Said the Gemara, said the Mishnah Hoyde Kohen Mashiach Latzma, he paskin himself shogeg, and also shogeg, then maybe pat. Now he's different than everybody else. Everybody else brings a sheep or a kesef or a seed, a sheep or a goat, a lamb or a goat. He brings a cow, bull. Shogeg. What about shogeg? Also makes it like by a bezin. He made a mistake, but then Lepoil, when he did it, he forgot what he paskin, and he just didn't amaze it. Or Maze was right. He knew when he passed him that he was fun-footing, that was not the right thing. And then afterwards he forgot and he did shogeg. Potter is potter. Same thing like a bezin. And that's the chiddush. The chiddush here is that he's not chai b'kar b'chatzos unless he follows the bezin. So the Gemara, shogeg was a shogeg may be par. If he passed like a bezin, pshita is not obvious that if he made a mistake and he passed him wrong and he followed through, that this is a normal case of shogeg. What's the chiddush? Tell me he brings a par. I'm going to buy it. Says, there's a chiddush involved, even in this case. You know what we're talking about? He paskin. The shochach me'ezet tam hoida. He can't remember what basis he paskined. So while he was making the mistake, he wasn't really relying on the heter because he didn't remember the heter. But what he did say was, I'm sure I had a good heter. I can't remember what it was, but I'm going to continue on that path. The mouth, I would have thought in this case, maybe if he taka finds out, he remembers what his heter is, he'll rethink it and say, hey, I'm totally wrong. It's not wrong. So then Hadabay, he wouldn't have done it. So maybe Kemez is dummy, and yet he continued doing it. It's like it's between Shegi and Mez. It's not Mamash Shegi. But like Lechayiv, this was Ramachama's question before. Kamashalan comes to teach you that no, that this is considered Shegi and he's Chayiv. Then you say Mezid v'asa Shegi. You know how do you know that? Okay, this starts in the Gemara. So the Mishnah. So we'll stop with here and think tomorrow. Mitzvah.